Welcome to the Wolf Power Club, the weekly podcast where we discuss energy, industry and politics. I'm your host Alex. I've sold and bought a few companies and also I've sold billions of litres. Join me on this journey to net zero. Download on Apple Podcasts. Season 1 brought to you by AIM Recruit, the leading recruiters in logistics, transport and energy at www.aimrecruit.com. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's episodes of the Wolf Power Club Energy Podcast. It's the number one energy podcast on Apple charts and we're in the top 10 of the business. But today we have a first for ourselves. We have the first father and son combination and the first religious leader. Today I'm delighted to welcome Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg and his energy investment son Amos to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Just as a warm-up, before we go into your evening on the podcast, what have you been doing today to get ready for the podcast today?
Well, I have a good sort of transition point between our worlds, which is I had breakfast this morning with two other founders in the climate tech space, but both of them are people I also knew from synagogue, Jonathan's synagogue.
Meetings, but also planning a walk around one of the new Jubilee London routes for the sake of eco-Judaism and environmental concerns, stopping off at key points where we can demonstrate issues around biodiversity, around energy, and around just transition.
Fuel your weekly knowledge with the Wolf Power Club podcast. Subscribe now. Fantastic. So I think for the first discussion point tonight, I'd love to know why a rabbi has decided to dedicate his life to the environment. We met at the Net Zero conference and it'd be great to tell our listeners how you ended up in this world.
So several different factors. The religious one is that the world of the Hebrew Bible and the world of the rabbis, I'm talking around between the year 0 and 500, they're farmers. They are deeply aware of the land. They know the meaning of drought. They know the meaning of rainfall at the wrong time in the wrong places. Pests. They care about the renewability of the soil because there aren't other resources. They know the birds, the wildlife, the plants. They know them by name. They know them intimately. And the overall message of the Hebrew Bible is this is God's earth. Don't destroy it. We have a responsibility to care for it. And that's had a profound impact on me. But equally, I've always loved and been brought up to love. And I think we've transmitted this, I hope, to our children. Walking, nature, beautiful places, watching the birds, a wonderful experience of watching the reintroduced beavers in a Scottish loch a summer ago. So the world of nature and its beauty speaks to us all. And then becoming aware of the swift impact of climate change. Even, in London now, this is a semi-arid zone. It used not to be like that. People joke about it always raining in Britain, but actually we've had a lot of drought, seeing things turn yellow, watching the changes and feeling scared.
I think it's hit home recently, the devastation that can hit by environment. I've got a good friend called Alex O'Leary who lives in Valencia. And when you hear about what occurred there, it's just devastating to hear that a whole part of the city's been taken away through the weather changes and hit the city so hard. Now, Amos, you haven't come a rabbi, but you've ended up in the field of energy. Why didn't you follow your father's route? And what are you doing now?
I'm not a rabbi. I'm in a somewhat similar field insofar as being a startup founder and being a rabbi both involve conceptions of belief and creating belief in different cohorts of people, perhaps. But I am the founder of a startup that provides data on climate risks to primarily investors, some companies as well. So we are thinking generally a little bit less about these existential risks associated with climate change. So, our entire species could become extinct, the planet could become uninhabitable in large chunks, these very big, terrifying things. We're usually looking on a 5 to 10 year time frame and helping our clients understand how their portfolios of investment might be affected by those shorter term climate risks. So things like floods affecting assets in different places, for example, or disrupting supply chains, but also on what the industry calls the transition risk side. So this transition is an energy transition. Energy is fundamental to every supply chain, every sector, and so every sector is going to have to adapt with new technologies driven by new policies, changing markets. And so as well as looking at the risks of the physical impacts of climate change in the short term, we look at those transitional risks. So how might the demand for steel go up or its price be affected because of carbon taxes levied at the border under particular European policy sets?
What money should the directors, the listeners of this podcast, those key stakeholders in the energy, where should they be investing in sustainability, and what's the importance of that, Rabbi?
So I suppose the energy I'm mostly concerned with is spiritual energy, but that's of a different kind. I was really pleased to speak at the Net Zero Festival because the coming together of religious and ethical leaders with business leaders is exactly the combination we need to share the theory and the motivation and the drive and the ideas with people who are struggling with the economic realities of it. And so far as it is possible for energy companies to look at, well, where is this going to leave my children and my children's children? What are the medium-term and long-term consequences of the way in which I'm trying to access and produce energy? What are the detrimental effects? What is my concomitant commitment then to biodiversity, to change, to transition to greener energies? How do I proceed with that in a way that will assure a safe future for the future generations?
Jonathan, I've seen boards take up that mantle. They've moved on from like a piece of A4 20 years ago to really looking at no longer buying consumption, purely ICE fuels, fossil fuel companies, and there has to be a renewal element into that investment. And we've seen that investment change, Jonathan, that's really changed the capital and the outlet. But Amos, what would you say is a good investment now, taking into the factors of sustainability we've just mentioned?
So from my perspective, I should say we are not necessarily in the business of telling people what to invest in, as opposed to what the risks may be that are associated with their existing or prospective investments. But I do personally think a lot about the energy transition as something that's inevitable, that's well underway, that has massive market disruption however it proceeds, meaning if it goes too slowly, we're going to have to adapt to the physical consequences of climate change much more, and that will affect different kinds of supply. We'll need more air conditioning units and flood defenses, for example. And if it proceeds faster, then we're going to need vast supplies of critical transition minerals, for example. So when I think about how to invest some of my own savings, I have built kind of portfolios around some of those transition bets, like copper mining companies, for example. That said, I'm not a professional investor, stock picker by any means, so I haven't necessarily made the best choices there, but thematically, those are some ideas that I've thought about.
Jonathan, Amos made a really good point there about the community and how it can affect decision making. How do you see that community, whereas a synagogue or others, being able to have a group of 1,000 people together to make big investment choices, to make decisions and influence decision makers?
So it's really interesting to think of what the Church of England has done, because they've got collective assets and finances on a very considerable scale across the Anglican Communion, with influence in churches in other countries. And the amount they've been able to divest and reinvest elsewhere amounts to trillions. And they've made that a conscious decision, also not just saying we are going to divest from you because you're a disaster for the climate, but they've also said, transition with us over the coming 5 years. If you do that, we stay with you. So they've actually used their shareholder leverage to change where they invest and to move the market. Now, the Jewish community doesn't have collective assets of that kind, but some individual synagogues have got assets. And also there are people involved in their work fields who might be in professional teams where those questions come up, because the ethics of investment for for pensions, capital investment. They come up all the time. And now it's, I think 10 years ago, people didn't say when there was a budget presentation, what is the ethical policy alongside what, the money we have to be able to keep running according to the Charity Commission's requirement for half a year or a year, where now those questions are coming up all the time. And so they should. I would also want to argue that alongside a religious organization's charitable endeavors, and all of us have them for, we talk about, also, there's also the issue of climate justice. And it should be mandated that a certain amount of that charitable endeavor is in the area of biodiversity, is supporting countries with their just transitions. And that was indeed a major issue, ever since COP26, where that was first raised, and certainly at COP29. And there's plenty more work to do.
Now, not to name drop too big here, but I was at lunch, a charity lunch with Peter Jones, and he was saying that one of the big differences between the US and the UK, and he's on Shark Tank in America, is such a more positive atmosphere to raise capital in America for projects. What do you think about this capital raising opportunities?
That is generally what people say. You can raise more money faster as an early stage entrepreneur in the US, although generally if you have someone who's American on your team, or if you're prepared to incorporate your company in the US, there's some kind of prerequisite. I should say that though, that I have had the privilege not of meeting but of hearing speak another member of Dragon's Den, which is Deborah Meaden, who was a huge early mover and early advocate in the world of ESG, and that's a massive part of the work that she does now in her profile. And all of the buyers of our software are people involved in the world of ESG, or the term is sort of evolving, but sustainability, responsible investing, climate aware investing. And many of the reasons why they might buy our software are driven by regulatory requirements in the UK and Europe, as well as kind of the pure financial incentive of managing risk. And for the kind of business that I'm building, the UK is, as a result, a fantastic place to be, because the US has been so far behind in regulating on those topics. And actually, I think there's a tendency to complain about European over-regulation, European bureaucracy around things like climate disclosure, but I can talk to many examples of those disclosure requirements achieving their purpose of driving real engagement with the underlying issues of climate risk, and not being box-ticking exercises. We see that all the time with our clients.
So there's two kinds of ways in which I'm engaged, and Eco-Judaism project is engaged laterally. One is internationally. And in fact, we've had interest in our project from Australia, South Africa, France. USA has been ahead of our curve it's got some very well-established environment conscious organizations and retreat centers which do excellent work in quite a challenging environment. And we're in touch, very much in touch with them, although we're on our own, slightly different path here. And likewise, we're building links with Israel, as you'll appreciate, a very difficult environment at the moment, but the Society for Protection of Nature in Israel, which is very much engaged with biodiversity more than energy. We're closely working with them now as well. So that's absolutely true. And there's strength in that international aspect to it. But the other way in which we're working laterally is with other faiths. So the whole Eco-Judaism endeavor was inspired by Eco-Church. And we're part of Faiths for the Climate, which networks with also the Hindu, the Muslim, the Buddhist community, and the pagan community, actually, with the view that governments and businesses listen to multi-faith voices talking together much more than they listen to any single faith, even though the Christian community is by far the biggest in this country.
Fantastic. Now, there's a big festival coming up, Hanukkah, on the horizon. I was just wondering, what is a great environmental gift to give each other at this time of the year that families should be giving each other that would actually drive great values in terms of ethical investment, rise the environment, or just intriguing about the world around us? I know a few years back I gave my godson a subscription to WWF. He loves it, and I'm just interested what you guys are going to do.
Well, there's a number of possibilities here. First of all, it is all about energy. And the thought about something that it would have lasted for one day but lasted for 8 means making sure that the energy you consume when lighting something lasts a lot longer than you thought. So that's really rooted in the festival without going to presents. Your WWF UK membership is brilliant. There's also the Woodland Trust, the RSPB. One of the best gifts I ever gave to a young twins whom Amos knows very well, who would never stop talking, was membership of the Royal Society of Protection of Birds. So next time they came round, instead of chattering, we're going, shh, shh, you're frightening away the birds. So this was very effective. There's also, chocolates are a classic seasonal gift, and making sure that they are ethically sourced because there is child slavery in the chocolate trade. There are many possibilities here. There are also families who've got the custom that a different person gives a gift each night to the other family members, but one night everybody agrees on some kind of charitable giving. And if that's environmentally focused, that's a good thing.
I've never thought of Hanukkah as being about LED lighting or indeed scarcity of oil resources, right? That's, yeah, very nice. Maybe my contribution would be gifts that encourage people to spend time in natural environments. So I'm a big climber. I love going to the climbing gym, and that's led me to some amazing outdoor places. So maybe take someone to the climbing gym as a Hanukkah gift. I don't know.
I love that example, Amos, of the climbing gym, but I love the environmental outdoors. For me, the Alps is where I find the happiness. I think also is where you actually see the biggest impact on the environment. Every year you go, especially to glacier fields, you see how far back the ice has been, and it's truly shocking to visually see that impact on the earth of what's happened on those glacier fields. In 2025, do you think there'll be a bigger impact on the environment from religious communities or from the actions of business communities?
I wouldn't go for either or. I think the real challenge is how do we work the both and successfully to think through together. I mean, as a synagogue, we can learn from business communities how to be effective in our own investments, heating. We're looking at, we haven't got solar panels let, we have got a heat pump, but it's sort of possibly not adequate for our needs. So and also we've got one synagogue building, but we've got 1,000 individual homes here. We've got much to learn, but also if we can think through the values rooted in spiritual tradition, and most people in this country are part of some kind of religious community, and around the world it's estimated at over 80%. So if we can work together with business leaders to think through how can those values be translated into pragmatic realities, that would be a great win.
Yeah, it's again, it's the same people in different parts of their lives, and different kinds of argument, different kinds of language. But in the end, I think that what I see when people speak in synagogue or speak to Dad is that they suddenly become comfortable talking about values, talking about things that they can't easily talk about in their work life. And that, I think, is the importance of these environments, that we can engage with the values, engage with things that might then change how we behave in the office.
Amos, this question is slightly harder for you, but Rabbi, what one piece of advice would you give to the younger yourself about environment or energy career, about how to progress your career forward?
Oh, that is a difficult, that's not an easy question. I would say be a bit braver about it, engage more robustly, don't be scared to talk about it. Don't behave as if for you two it was only on the margins. It matters. It's at the center of things.
Amos, I appreciate your younger self's going very far back, but what would you say with a startup over the last few years you've really learned that you can share with the listeners and learn not to do again?
Loads of things. But I think that when we're hiring people, interviewing people, so people in their 20s, often they talk about really wanting an impact career. But I think that when you probe that, when I probe it for myself, it's not always that clear what it means. I.e., working on climate as a route to impact. Sure, it's a huge issue, but there's lots of people working on it, and also it's very systemic, it's very indirect. You're not going to come home at the end of the day and feel that you solved the climate crisis. And so it may, if what you need from your job is to feel that you're doing something worthwhile, working on climate might be a terrible answer, actually. So you're probably never going to have that kind of feeling of resolution. Working in the care sector, working as a doctor, or working on climate but with projects that are much more grassroots, maybe that would deliver that satisfaction much more meaningfully. So I think my advice to myself and to others is to think about what it really means to have an impact career and what you need to get out of going to work every day. And then, is that something that job A versus job B will give to you? But I think you need to weigh that up against the kind of leverage that you can have in different roles, and that's based on who you are and the skills that you have. And so I probably don't have the skills to be a great rabbi, but I was good at working with people who could build software. So that's where, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing and not what Dad's doing.
Now we've got our quick fire questions. Quick fire question: whether it's time or money, what would you invest in the energy industry in 2025?
The first person that we hired as a business development director, she is Italian, and her parents had a small business making, as I remember, kind of components for snow plows. And they had gone out of business. There just wasn't demand for their product anymore because there wasn't enough snow. So I've not been in the position of sitting down specifically with a ski resort and talking to them about climate risk. But in general, when you're talking about risk identification and mitigation, we build software that's generally very good at pinpointing risk across a very, very broad set of questions. What are the policies that matter? What are the kinds of risk? Is it flooding? Is it wildfires? Is it drought that could affect this kind of asset in this place? And then it's a much more involved conversation based on a deeper understanding of the business as to how you manage that. And it might be raising the factory floor, and it might be hedging your supply of a particular product, but it tends to be much more idiosyncratic.
And back to my quick fire question, Jonathan, what would be investing time or energy into?
Well, I was thinking actually, it may not quite fit the bill, but agro-farming and renewable farming, so sustainable farming, and it needs the investment because it's still sort of fairly new, but it's trying to produce profitable farming while avoiding dangerous chemicals and while renewing the soil and biodiversity. So that's where I put what I...
Fantastic. We've obviously got a new government. What would you like the government to deliver in 2025?
Well, I would like to see it pass the CAN bill for climate and wildlife. That's a very close thing, and that's just coming up. And I would like it not to be shy of ambitious targets. I think the point that Amos made is that the political horizon is relatively short term, and that can be damaging to really long-term creative thinking about transition. So to have the courage to make long-term decisions and get us on the pathway there.
And I think the courage to talk about it, albeit, I haven't looked at the data, I haven't done the polling on how voters respond to climate as an issue, but I think that I'm really impressed by Miliband. I'm really impressed by what this government has done, indicated so far on climate. I would like to see it talk about it more. I did a small amount of campaigning for our local Labour candidate who was elected. And I was always hoping I'd have the opportunity on the doorstep to talk about climate, and never did, because it didn't seem to be an issue that the government felt was going to be important, was going to win at votes.
I think you guys have hit the nail on the head about ambition, and that 4 or 5 year cycle sometimes stops that. It's purely about winning across the line. I do predict in the future, but maybe not right, that maybe environment will end up in those top 3 things that a government has to deliver, and it will be discussed on the doorstep, Amos. And final quickfire question, what would you want energy customers to do, i.e. households?
So I'd like them to be informed and encouraged to move over to renewable sources of energy, to insulate properly, to take the measures that you can, and to have the help they need where they need financial help and support to do that.
And Amos, what do you think?
I heard Greg Jackson, the CEO of Octopus, being interviewed on Today a few days ago, and he talked about electric blankets, and he got told that it was tokenistic to be sending people in fuel poverty electric blankets. And he rightly pushed back against that claim. And I really stand by his point, which is actually heating yourself, the room you're in, rather than a huge drafty house, is so much more effective. You will be warmer and it will cost you less money. And so solutions like that, which require zero investment, can actually be really, really important when we have a very cold winter.
Amos and Rabbi, thank you for your time today. I'm sure all of our listeners would love to engage with you in the future. What's the best way to stay in contact with you?
So for me, either go to the Eco-Judaism website, which will give you the wider, people involved in it, or my blog with Heart and Mind.
Probably LinkedIn for me rather than TikTok. But as well as specifically what we do on climate risk, I'm really happy always to talk to people who are thinking about building careers in climate and be helpful if I can.
Amos, Rabbi Wittenberg, thank you for your time today. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed the Wolf Power Club. It's been our first religious leader. It's been our first father and son act. It's been a wonderful way as we edge towards the end of 2024. We are on Apple, Spotify, TikTok, YouTube. TikTok's new to me, but it's great. We're having some great debates on energy sustainability, and I hope there's going to be lots of fans of Amos and Rabbi on the TikTok channel. Thanks very much, guys. Bye.